Hello, my name's Heidi. I'm going to be talking you through the speed drawing of my dog Aria. So I start by mapping out the drawing. You can see that I'm doing a basic circle shape, and I'll do some other kind of basic shapes. I've printed out a few pictures, one that I reference for just the drawing itself, and then one that I put lines on so that I can measure certain things to make sure that I get everything lined up correctly. So I'm using my pencil to measure different shapes, and I actually got very lucky when I started out this drawing. Didn't do it on purpose, but it is a good technique, where I accidentally did a 1-for-1 scale drawing, which is hard to do if you're not trying to do, but somehow I managed. But that is a very good technique if you want it to be exactly like the picture that you printed out. So you can see that I'm measuring things there, and just to make sure that I have the head as wide as I want it to be and as long as I want it to be, and have the ears the right shape. And I'll actually fiddle around with the ears quite a bit. It took me a little while to get them to be right where I wanted them to be, in the right shape and everything. The reason why I use my pencil to measure things is because sometimes your eye can trick you and you think that something is I spend a lot of time with my dog, so I know that she has pretty big ears. But if I don't measure it, I might accidentally exaggerate those. I did one drawing similar to this where I didn't measure as much, and it did end up with her ears being quite a lot bigger than they actually were in the picture. So measuring with your pencil can help a lot with those issues, so you don't run into problems as much and have to redo stuff as much. Although you will find in this drawing that I do redo quite a few things. And I think that's fine, because I'd rather have something end up being how it is than just settle for what I did to start out with. I actually, I think make that mouth a little bit too low to start out with. And I actually later I'll put in details of the mouth, and I still am not happy with it, so I end up changing it all, and to make it more in the right spot. So at this point of the drawing, I'm just putting in some more details, so I can decide where the eyes were, so I had a way to measure them. I found that her eyes in the picture lined up with the corners of her nose on the inside of her eyes, and so that helped to get the eyes in about the right place. And those lines that I made down from the ears that are a little hard to see maybe in the video, but I made some lines down from the tips of the ears, and so I knew that her eyes were not quite out that far, but in between the lines between her nose and the lines between her eyes. So when you're doing these first marks and mapping out how the drawing is going to go, you want to use a hard pencil, but you do not want to press down very hard, because if you do, it'll leave indents in the page, and when you go to make new marks over it, you'll be able to still see that, and it doesn't leave a good effect. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with my initial sketch of the drawing, and I'm going to go ahead and start doing details on the nose. I started out on the nose because it's one of the darkest places on the image. And when I started a drawing, I like to get my darkest darks in there so that I have kind of a range to go by. Because especially in a drawing like this, there's going to be a lot of white, since it's a white dog. And in those white places, I'm actually not going to put any marks at all because the paper's already white. And so I want to get my range in there, so I have my darkest darks and my whitest white, which is the page, and so that I know that anything else has to be in between. And so with my heaviest pencil, the 8B, I went ahead and I marked those nostrils in there, and I'm using the smudging stick to soften some of the things up a little bit, and kind of the smudging stick does a good job of taking the colors around it and blending them together. It can be good because then you get a base color, but sometimes you lose the variation, which is why I'm going in with an eraser and getting some of that variation in there a little bit more. And then I'll go in again with a pencil, and as I do some of the lighter parts on the nose, I'll go between like a 4B and a 5B, so that it's not super dark, but still a little bit darker. I use a variety of erasers in this. I use the rubber eraser. It's kind of like a putty, sort of, and that does a really good job of getting like soft spots. And also, when you erase with the other erasers, it's really good at picking up those fuzzies. And I also use the big eraser when I need to erase really big spots. But then I have another eraser that is, it might be called a mechanical eraser. It's where it's very, very skinny on the end, and so you can get like really tiny spots. And so when I'm doing this nose, because of the light that I'm in, it was kind of hard to see things because the lead is kind of shiny. And so often I was looking into the actual camera that I was recording with so that I could get a different view of it and see it from overhead. And it's a really good tactic that you can use as well if you just, you can either take your picture and you can hold it in a mirror. That kind of helps you see it at a little bit of a different way. You can also take a picture of it and look at it through the picture lens. And they really help you just kind of see your image differently to see if you're still happy with it. And so with the nose, it was a lot of playing around between erasing and putting more marks in. And it's just something with a lot of these, if you're doing a very sensitive drawing, you have to go back and forth a lot until you're just happy with it. And then I'll move on to the eyes here. The eyes were the next thing that I moved on to because again, it was another dark area that I wanted to touch on. I also kind of sometimes like to get the hard things out of the way. The nose and the eyes were definitely the two hardest parts of this image. And getting those out of the way and then taking like a little break helps you feel like the rest isn't going to be too difficult. And so again with the eyes, it's a lot of back and forth between making things lighter and darker. Again, I'm getting that smudging stick in there to make a general base color for the eyes, and then going in with my eraser to lighten some spots up. And as you can see at the bottom of the page there, I was just playing around with the eraser a little bit. What I was doing was I was getting a really sharp, really pointed end on it. You can do this at the bottom of your page if you know that you're not going to do anything else there, because it gets the page a little bit messy, or you can do it on a separate page if you just have like a scrap laying around. I also need to do that sometimes because if you've been erasing a lot with it, sometimes it'll get kind of darker and it won't be erasing very well. And so I've got some highlights in the eyes there, and again, it was just a lot of back and forth between that. It's a little bit easier sometimes if the eyes are dark because you don't have as much light or as much detail in there because some of it's just kind of shadowed over by the darkness of the eyes. Also, Aria has what we call eyeliner, so the outsides of her eyes are completely black, so that can kind of help a little bit because it has its own outline. So now I'm moving on to the mouth, and like I stated earlier, I actually ended up redoing this mouth again, just because I wasn't very happy with it. I thought it was too low. And so sometimes when you really get into a drawing, if you're like too hyper-focused on one area, you kind of don't notice those things until after you move along a little bit. And that's okay, because with most things, it's never too late to fix it. It might be one of those things where you think about it like, oh man, is it worth it? And I think it usually is. Even if you have to erase the entire thing and move some things around. I think that it's worth it in the end, because otherwise you're going to be staring at that one spot the entire time and being like, oh god, I can't believe I messed that up. What I'm doing here is I've darkened the mouth, and there are some spots that are a little bit lighter. It's kind of hard to see. And then I use both a hard and soft pencil to get those lines in there. Throughout this drawing, when doing the lines for the hair, I tried to use, I figured out that it was best to use for where you can see kind of the black, because she's got kind of like her skin, some parts of her skin are kind of black, and so you can kind of see that through some parts, like on her mouth, under her nose. And so I tried to use the bold pencils for those spots where it's actually kind of dark or black. And then for the white spots, for the white parts of her hair, I tried to use the hard pencils, because it made it look lighter. And it's tricky with a white dog trying to put hair in there, because you want to show that there's hair, but because her hair is white, whenever you're making a mark, you're not actually making a mark for the hair, you're making a mark for the shadow of the hair. And so it can get kind of tricky and easy to make too many marks. And again, now I'm putting in her darkest spots, because I like to start with the darkest things so that I can make it lighter from there. And in some of the spots where it's a gray or a light gray, I tried to use a combination of the bold and the hard pencils. And there were times when I had to go in with my eraser because I wasn't happy with it. And so it's just kind of, even with those things, kind of playing around between erasing and making marks. So here I've gone in and I'm going to start making some marks on the face for where the shadows are. And I'm going to go in with my hard pencil. Before I do that, I need to erase where my guidelines were. And so I've gone and I've done that, and I've picked up all the fuzzies with the kind of putty eraser. And it's tricky because you have to erase marks and then make the marks quickly after, so you don't forget where those marks were. But you want to erase them first so that those guidelines don't show up in the final drawing. If you like them, you can leave them in there, but I prefer them without. So here I'm going in and I'm fixing the mouth. As you can see, I've erased all of it. And so I'm going to basically start from scratch, but like I said, it'll be worth it because now I won't look at that part of the picture and think, oh shoot, I should have done that differently. So basically the same thing where I'm going in and I'm making it really dark and lightening up a few areas. Then I'm going to go in with one of my bold pencils, and I'm going to make the line so that it looks like, because there's still like little hairs around where her lips are. And so I go in and I make those hairs show up. And so I guess that I put too many marks because I'm going in with my eraser now and I'm taking some of them away. It's tricky to do when you're doing, when you're showing hair on animals, because it's tricky to get those patterns back through erasing. It's easier if you have a skinny eraser, or sometimes you just have to erase a whole entire area and do it over again. But if you don't do it right, then you'll be able to see where you erased. And so it's a little bit of a learning process. So here I'm starting to go in again with the pencil and bring out some of those shadows. I'm getting rid of some of the contour lines and making the image look a little bit more lifelike. I'm starting out with a 2H pencil, which is the darkest of the hard pencils. Again, I'm not pressing down hard at all. I'm just lightly putting those lines in there, making them look kind of like hairs. And I'm looking at the image that I printed out and seeing how the hairs are on her face, like which directions they go, and I'm trying to mimic those with my pencil. And so I'll start out with the 2H, and as I get into the lighter areas, I'll grab some of the lighter of the hard pencils, like the 3H and then the 4H. And it'll help give a lot of variation to the face, so even though I'm putting some shadows in there, they won't look too dark. And trying to leave as much white as I can on the image while still giving enough details to show that there are shadows and to give the shape of the face of the dog. Again, it's tricky with a white dog because you don't want to do too much or you'll lose that it's a white dog. But it's nice because you get to practice using as little lines as you can while still giving a lot of information. And so I'm starting to do the ears here now, and I'm starting out by making them a little bit darker where the centers are. I'm going in with that smudging stick. Then I'm going to take that skinny eraser, and I'm making kind of little hairs like I would with a pencil, but with an eraser. They're not going to be as perfect and skinny, but that's okay. And I'm just going in with that putty eraser and picking up the fuzzies. Then I'll put in some of the hairs in there. Again, trying not to do too much because I don't want it to look darker than it really is. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to make the background darker by using that smudging stick and a spare piece of paper. And I'm just trying to darken the edges, again, so that I don't have to make the dog any darker than it has to be. And so I'm making the outside darker so that I can use it to show some of the hair instead of using pencil marks. And so that'll make more sense once I start going into it. Basically what I did was on a separate piece of paper, I took my 8B and I rubbed a lot of lead on there and then picked it up with my smudging stick so that I could make the outside darker. You could use your pencil and just put it directly on the paper. My only worry with that is then you'll be able to see the marks. Sometimes they don't go away perfectly even with the smudging stick. And so that's why I decided not to do it that way. Going into the ears a little bit more, I lost some of the detail when I put that darker background in. And so you can see here I'm going in with that with a smaller smudging stick, and I'm just making the edges of the ears and the neck, pretty much anywhere where that white fur shows up against that darker background. I'm just bringing it in a little bit to make it look like little hairs, make it look a little fuzzy. Then I'm doing a little bit more detail on the ears. And so basically I'm just going along the edge, and you can see it a little better on the neck there, but I'm just making it look a little bit fuzzier, making her look a little fuzzy. Now this neck was a little bit tricky. I discovered that, well, like with the hair on the face, you can see it a lot better, and I then realized, like, oh, it's because the camera isn't focused as much on her neck. And so what I do here is that I make it dark, and I'm a little unruly with the hairs on it. I don't care too much about them looking perfect because I'm going to go over it with a smudging stick. And I'm going to basically make it look a little bit blurry, kind of like how it is in the image. And so once I'm kind of happy with that and it looks a little bit darker, I fix up a few things with an eraser, just so, because some things got a little bit darker than I wanted them to be. Then go in with some pencils. I used hard pencils for this. Although it's darker than what the face is, it's still, I don't want it to be too dark. I don't want to use those bolds because that would make it a little bit too dark. So I'm going in with some hard pencils, but mostly using the 2H because it is a darker area. and just putting a little bit more detail in there so you can kind of see the hairs. Then with a lighter hard pencil, probably the 3 or 4H, I'm going in and I'm putting some more hairs on the neck. So the last thing to do here is to finish up the bandana. Again, I'm putting those darkest darks in there, and then I'll go in and I'll do some more shading and highlighting. I like to include the bandana so it didn't look so much like a severed dog head and more like it had an end to it. If you remember, I had the little tie in there too off to the side, but I decided to do away with that just because I didn't think it was necessary and maybe it would be a little bit distracting. Here I'm putting in, just making it look a little bit different from the background so it doesn't match it too much. Then I'm putting in some creases, and then I'll soften them up with that smudging stick a little bit where they need to be. Then I'll put some highlights in there and just kind of soften everything up. I finished the bandana and then I thought that it looked a little bit too harsh, stood out a little bit too much. Then I'll soften it up at the end with one of the erasers. You just kind of put a little bit of a pattern in there, enough to make it look like a pattern. So this concludes our speed drawing of my dog Aria, and I hope that you enjoyed the video.